Hi everybody. For my project, I have focused on Chapter 5's readings, which include the following titles by Lynn Wollenberg and Zane Burge, Kathleen Sircone, and Maria Pistofero. In this presentation, I will be providing you with an introduction to these readings and, at the very end, I will go over the implications of the research and why it is important. Ultimately, I hope to encourage you to read these materials further so you can improve your own instruction and understanding. At first, we're going to be looking at student barriers to online learning. Just a brief summary of this research. The two authors engaged in a literature review about barriers that students experience in e-learning environments. Previous research considered multiple factors such as gender, ethnicity, access, and understanding of technology, and number of online courses completed. So ultimately, these authors considered this research and then conducted their own surveys that explored other factors such as learning enjoyment, number of online courses completed and dropped, the likelihood of taking a future online course, and whether students experience prejudicial treatment in the traditional classroom. So the main question that these two authors were really focusing on was, what causes individual differences in outcomes for online learners? The objective also was just to learn the barriers that students face to design e-learning environments that respond accordingly. Now, as you can see here, I have just pinpointed some information about the pilot study. Pilot study, or the first study, focused on time and interruptions, so distractions that students may experience in online learning environments. Infrastructure support services, which in our class we have the help desk. Motivation, typically intrinsic. Prerequisite skills. Then there's also technical and social elements involved in this. For the main study, or the second study, these were the results. The very important barriers, which the most important actually, was seen as a lack of social interaction. Second, administrative and instructor issues. Third, time and support for studies. 4, learner motivation, and then you can see on this page it gets to the less important, and then finally the least important. Technical problems, cost and access, and then finally lack of technical skills and academic skills. So this is how the students responded to these authors' survey. The next study we'll be looking at is by Sircone, which is really focusing on adults and how adults respond to learning environments and how we should be creating learning environments for adults in particular ways. So the author discusses and reviews 4 adult learning theories: androgyny, self-directed learning, experiential learning, and then finally transformational learning. And the main question for this author, what this author approaches, is how do you design an effective online classroom environment for adults? So, very early on in this study, the author actually explains that most distance education students are adults between the ages of 25 and 50. This is very significant because just like any classroom, we need to make sure that we are instructing and making sure that our instruction is tailored to students' desires and learning styles. For adults, that means they're looking for flexibility. Why? Because they have families, they have jobs, they have other responsibilities that college students or younger students may not have. So it's important to focus on these differences and possible difficulties so that you can create a tailored environment for adult learners. For instance, it's interesting to point out, older students may experience memory loss, yet are typically highly motivated and task-oriented individuals. I'm actually going to show you a table now, which is a recommendation for online course development based on certain characteristics of adult learners. So for instance, we know that there's some limitations with adult students or older students in general. So, for instance, if they have poor eyesight, it's important to have large fonts, easy to read fonts. It's also important that you have clear instructions and expectations. Make sure you're providing feedback. Be consistent if using metaphor. Provide context. So all of these strategies and just suggestions are important. Personally, I think for all learning contexts, but especially for adult learners. So this author goes into a few theories, but specifies that while we're reviewing these theories, it's important to note that there is not just one theory specific or that could possibly explain how all adults learn. So it's important, yes, to know these studies and theories to better understand adult learning, but you can't just say that all adults learn in a particular way. So the first one's main focus was androgyny, which there are 5 assumptions. The first assumption, adults are often autonomous and self-directed learners. Second, they often have a lot of experience which can be tapped in online courses. So you make sure that you're using prior knowledge as a base or a foundation because adults have so much experience. Adults are typically goal-oriented and the course should reflect this. An adult is more problem-centered than subject-centered in learning, which differs from younger students. And adults are intrinsically motivated. The author then moves into other theories that are often connected to the previous theory. This one, experiential learning. As discussed before, adult experiences are a valuable resource. Connections can and should be made to prior experiences. The second, self-directed learning. Adults can be self-directed learners, and therefore they do not require the same direction or support that other learners receive. You want to make sure that it's more hands-on for them, that they are producing on their own, constructing. You're moving away from you just focusing on instruction and letting them do some of the learning themselves. Transformative learning, the final one, and this is actually pulled directly from the study because I thought it was very well said. These 2 authors stated that transformative learning is a process of critical reflection, which we know from our own course that this is significant in the learning process. It is about change in learners, and it is the kind of learning that occurs when individuals make meaning out of the world through experiences. Ultimately, after completing this reading, I found, and it was clearly stated as well, that there is no best theory. Not one theory can best suit your students, just like any student. Every student differs, and as the instructor, you have to decide what to do and how to best help your students. We are now moving on to the final reading by Putzafero, and the main question for this one pretty much was, what factors contribute to student success in an online course? And she really focused on what she called OTSE, which is Online Technology Self-Efficacy and Regulation. So there was a random sample of students from 163 online courses who completed 2 surveys, one regarding topics such as self-efficacy and the other on satisfaction. Now, just to clarify, students were using self-report instruments to consider their confidence levels in regards to technology and online learning methods. So some of the survey questions asked students how they felt about opening emails, attaching files to emails, participating in an asynchronous bulletin board, things that obviously help you while you're in an online learning environment and are significant to just learning in general within those environments. You want to make sure you know how to send an email and read an email and attach files. But actually, it is found that students' online technology self-efficacy had no effect on their success or performance. However, other skills, such as time and study environment and effort regulation, were significantly related to great performance. So these are metacognitive skills, making sure that you're reading materials, staying on top of tasks, performing tasks in a timely manner, participating actively in discussion boards, make sure you're emailing your peers. Everything that online learning environment needs and a student needs to do in this type of environment to be successful. Now, finally, why is this so important? What does this have to do with us as learners and educators? Firstly, with this information, those creating online courses can address the problems found in these studies. For instance, how and why to address students' differences in online courses, how students' ages can influence the online learning environment, what contributes to student success, and how can we, as educators, create an effective online learning environment. Now, how can these studies be applied? As students who are creating our own e-learning environments, we can use this information, keep constantly referring back to it. So for instance, some suggestions that I have made myself. You can create more social opportunities. So for instance, I thought possibly weekly or bi-weekly audio-video meetups. You want to encourage virtual study sessions or workshops, anything to get social interaction started within your course. Also, I thought it'd be important. We have to consider our own likes and dislikes of online courses while grading our own final projects. Something to consider. We want to make sure that we are thinking about things that we see as weaknesses in our own experiences so that we can improve upon them when we are constructing our own. We also want to consider differences among students, including age, which sounds silly, but it's not something that I considered beforehand. Finally, you always want to be open to suggestions. You give your students possibly surveys, reflection activities, so both you and the student are critical of the learning process. Now, why should others read these materials? As educators, we all need to be aware of our students' perceptions of our courses and learn what we can do to create a better learning experience for them. It is important to acknowledge the flaws or weaknesses in our own instructions and online courses so that we can improve. In addition, it is important for administration, parents of students, and the general public to know what online instructors are doing to create effective learning environments that may be different than the traditional setting, but are just as successful in their own ways. Obviously, we've seen in previous readings, and also just from listening to our peers, that typically online learning environments are scrutinized. Typically, people think that you're not getting the same education, that it's a weakest form of education, and that you should only be in a traditional setting. But we know that it can be just as successful as long as these programs and courses are implemented successfully. Ultimately, no matter what, it is important to stay informed, which is why everyone should be reading these pieces. If you have any further questions about these materials, I will happily go over them with you, and I hope you enjoyed this recording.